All right, we're back. Episode 53 of Red versus Blue. My name is Mike Stark.
And I'm Keith Curry.
And as we have done since the inauguration, we're checking in every couple weeks to give an overview of what has taken place in that period of time that we're not with you. And there's always a lot going on. Where do you want to start, Keith?
Well, Mike, we're coming up on the 1 month mark for the Trump administration, and I have good news and bad news.
Okay.
The good news is that Donald Trump and Elon Musk have saved hundreds of billions of dollars. The bad news is they've saved it on behalf of the Chinese and the Russian intelligence services. So let's just think about what's happened. In the last month, the United States has shed hundreds of experienced CIA, FBI, Homeland Security, and Department of Justice agents who were key to our counterterrorism and counterintelligence efforts. Those people are either gone, either fired, replaced, or reassigned. We're now fighting with our neighbors on both borders, something that the Russians and Chinese would have hoped to provoke, but never in 1,000 years could have gotten it to the point to where it is now. We're threatening a fellow NATO member with taking over their territory. And if we can take Greenland, China is thinking, well, why can't we take Taiwan? It's the same thing. We've pulled out our aid from the third world, opening the door for China with their Belt and Road Initiative to go in and backfill us at half the cost from what they would normally have to pay in order to have influence in the third world throughout Africa and the Arab world and Asia. We're on the wrong side of the entire Arab world when it comes to the Gaza conflict. 4 decades of consensus about working together for peace there have been shattered. We're apparently going to either, depending on the second mark in Trump's comments, either going to buy, take, occupy, or be given Gaza, the last place Americans need to be.
Right.
We no longer have the moral high ground on imperialism and respecting international law, something that we held out as an example to the rest of the world for why they should be democratic and follow American lead. American voters no longer trust their institutions of government. Imagine how long it would take to create the social media campaign and the political effort to do that. Never in a try of 1,000 years could RT Russian television have accomplished what our own people have done to develop mistrust of American institutions. And Congress has been rendered impotent as a check and balance in our American system. The entire American checks and balances system, in fact, has been turned on its head. We now have a Russian stooge in charge of U.S. intelligence, a regular stooge in charge of the Department of Defense. Robert Kennedy is in charge of health, and soon an incompetent fool will be running the FBI. Not since Alger Hiss and Kim Philby have Russians so infiltrated the top levels of U.S. and allied governments with people who are associated and sympathetic to their views. It is a tremendous coup for Russia and for China. Hegseth had his deer in the headlights moments at NATO, blathering about the changes in U.S. policy. Vance basically came to another European summit the next day and, for the most part, contradicted everything Hegseth had to say, contradicting each other. We used to use a derisive term called surrender monkeys to describe the French because of how quickly they surrendered in World War II. Surrender monkeys now can apply to the United States for how we are approaching our international conflicts with Russia. Champagne flowed in the Kremlin this week because it was a spectacular success. And now we're getting ready to begin negotiating peace in Ukraine, for the most part, on Putin's terms.
Wow. That's a lot there going on. But it's because, now correct me if I'm wrong, and I will be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. The reason all these other things are happening is because Donald Trump is laser focused on what he promised in the election of lowering prices of goods and services, right?
Yeah, maybe not so much. Let's just talk about some of the impacts on the economy that have also happened during the same time that we're basically surrendering our world leadership. For example, USAID, the aid program. Everybody's been talking about what aid pays for. Aid pays for $2 billion in rice and other foodstuffs that go to the third world. All of those are produced by American farmers. You knock that out of the market, American farmers get shafted. Tariffs. The biggest U.S. export is to China is soybeans. They don't need Chevrolets, they need soybeans, and they buy tons of them. along with wine. Kentucky bourbons and Tennessee whiskey, highly dependent upon foreign trade. The largest buyer of liquor is the Liquor Authority of Ontario, Canada. That market is now in danger. The original gangster Green New Deal program was the ethanol subsidy for gasoline. In fact, the Iowa has their presidential caucuses first in the nation so that all the candidates can pledge allegiance to the ethanol subsidy. You take that out, and Iowa corn farmers get hurt. Farmers need to borrow in the capital markets for crops, and then they pay the loan back when they harvest them. If you jack up loan rates, and loan rates are going up, mortgage rates hit 7% this week, farmers get screwed. You need people to pick crops. That requires immigrant labor. Don't have any immigrant labor, crops can't get picked. So are you seeing a pattern here? It is Trump's own voters who are being impacted the worst by his economic policies. The 50-cent egg surcharge at Waffle House will fall almost entirely on Trump voters.
Right.
So we've got a situation that's hurting the very people who voted for it.
Now, a lot of this business of cutting waste and cutting staffing and all of that is directly placed in the executive branch of the government. And I need a civics lesson here, Keith. That is not where government financial oversight is supposed to be done, right?
No, there's a balance of power. The Congress has the absolute constitutional right to appropriate money. The president's not supposed to spend any money that has not yet first been appropriated by Congress. The Impoundment Act that was passed back in the Nixon administration is designed to make sure that the president, in fact, spends the money that is appropriated by Congress. He cannot unilaterally decide that he's not going to do that. In addition to that, there's collective bargaining agreements at many of the federal agencies that limit what a president can and cannot do. So all of this is being done in a way that ignores the traditional checks and balances, the traditional appropriations process, and the traditional spending control process. When they pass a spending bill, they usually write what's called report language that's very detailed. I mean, when I was at transportation, they would write which areas are going to receive grants in the transportation bill. And that became, part of the law. That's part of the deal that gets brokered between the Congress and the executive. Well, none of that's happening now. It's all happening on a very ad hoc basis by somebody who is a special government employee, although he has no conflict of interest requirements to report, apparently. And so it's happening outside of the normal bounds of how these decisions are made.
And it's clear that this person does have major conflicts of interest.
Well, while we're busy cutting billions of dollars from the budget, apparently we're going to spend $400 million to buy armored Tesla Cybertrucks. Given how long it takes to procure anything in the federal government, one has to wonder how this got moved to the top of the list for something to buy. But that of itself is a major and obvious conflict of interest from Elon Musk. The Prime Minister of India was in town this week, and he got a special audience with Musk, presumably to talk about Musk's business in India, because there's no other reason why he would be doing American diplomacy. So there are significant conflicts of interest, and there's significant questions about whether all of these savings are real. For example, 77,000 people have taken the early retirement program from the federal government. Now, that sounds like a way to save some money, give people a little extra cash as they go out the door, except for the fact that on an annual basis, historically, 100,000 federal workers, non-postal, non-military workers, retire annually, just as part of the natural course of things. So did we really save the taxpayers any money, or did we simply give a bunch of guys who were going to leave anyway some extra cash out the door and relieve them of the opportunity to work for 6 months?
Hadn't even thought about that. Yeah.
There's the issue. Much has been made of $50 million in condoms to Gaza. Apparently, it was AIDS preventive stuff going to the Gaza province of Mozambique and had nothing to do with Gaza or with Hamas. We have massive undifferentiated layoffs now happening in the departments. Now, I'm the first to say that there is waste in the government. We should reduce the workforce. We should manage this. But you have to be careful doing it with a scalpel. Anybody who's ever tried to get through on the phone to the Social Security Administration or to Medicare or to any other government agency knows that they are, in many cases, in terms of customer service, massively understaffed. And this is not being done in any way that is designed to manage to get to good public administration.
Just yesterday, they cut 1,000 employees from the veterans agencies. And the first thing that came to mind, and not just with that agency, but all of the things you've just talked about, all of the cuts that are being made in all of these departments of personnel. If you're running a business, if you're running an organization, if you're running a political, anything political, you need staffing to do it and provide services for those things. And it just makes sense that if you cut the staffing, the service is going to go down. Am I wrong here?
No, you're absolutely right. And the service is already not very good to begin with. I mean, again, anybody who's ever had to deal with the federal government or get on the phone with, somebody in Atlanta or Cincinnati or the IRS knows it's just a nightmare. If you've had a deceased relative and you're trying to deal with their Social Security, it's a nightmare. Right. And it's only going to get worse.
Yeah. And let's go back to the original discussion we had about who is supposed to be looking out for these staffing things and the money and all of that. And that is Congress, right?
Congress has an oversight role. Congress normally holds hearings before these kind of cuts are made. Each agency has an inspector general whose job it is to independently audit. All of those people have been fired, by the way. The General Accounting Office also does it on a sort of a government-wide basis. So all of the typical checks and balances for making sure that things are done in an orderly and responsive manner are gone. I used to joke with people when I was in government that process is our most important product. Now, it's only a partly joke because due process is guaranteed in the Constitution. We rely on, depend on, and accept the fact that our government will follow legal processes before it does things crazy, like making regulations or like cutting things out or like arbitrarily making decisions. There is a process to ensure that there's public input. People get to understand that. We have, in this case, completely undermined the process.
Wow. And the cabinet confirmations are all but complete, right?
They are, and the Republican Senate capitulated. Mitch McConnell is my new hero, but RFK Jr. is now at Health and Human Services. Tulsi Gabbard is our head of national intelligence. Kash Patel is still pending as FBI director. He may have a few hiccups. Maybe people are holding back their vote. They figure they could take out one, they'll take out him, but we don't know that. We think he's going to make it. He passed out of committee. So the problem with Donald Trump is he's going to get what he wished for. He's going to have a mediocre cabinet with mediocre skills, and they're going to provide mediocre administration. It will all reflect back on him. This week, Secretary of Defense Hegseth renamed Fort Liberty Fort Bragg. Again, it had been named for Braxton Bragg, a Confederate general. My great-great-grandfather actually fought with Braxton Bragg. He was not a very good general. But we now named it after Roland Bragg, a Silver Star winner who fought in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. Somebody nobody had ever heard of before. Right. But his name is Bragg, so now they can call the Fort Bragg once again, just a different Bragg. And it's that kind of performative nonsense that's going to characterize this administration to the detriment of accomplishing actual policy goals and keeping America safer and freer and its standing in the world. And because he's got mediocre yes people, he's not going to have the guardrails that he had before. He's not going to have the independent advice that he had before. He's going to have people who will indulge his baser and blacker instincts, and that's going to be ultimately be bad for him, but it will be bad for America and the free world.
It does seem so far that the judicial part of our government is pushing back a little bit. Now, whether that will hold up, what do you think?
Well, he's 1 for 10, I think, in federal court. So the judicial branch has been doing its job, including a lot of Republican-appointed judges who have looked at this and said it does not pass constitutional muster or legal muster or process muster. Those cases will eventually get to the Supreme Court. And I'm relatively confident that the Supreme Court will step in and not allow the biggest abuses to go forward. There may be a few, but not very many. And it's important to note, if you have a situation where a Republican president can decide unilaterally without congressional authorization, we're not going to have the Agency for International Development anymore. We're not going to have the Department of Education anymore. We're just going to close it down and shut it. Without congressional authorization, without process, In the last 80 years, there's only been one time where we've had a party administration exceed 8 years, Bush after Reagan. So we're going to have a Democratic president here probably in 4 to 8 years. And it might be Bernie Sanders. It might be AOC. And who's to say that they're not going to say, we have an Army, we have a Navy, we don't need a Marine Corps. And if Republicans allow this precedent to move forward, that the president can unilaterally cut down and shutter anything he wants to, they better be very careful because somebody else is going to cut things that they don't want to see cut.
The American people do have the power to change this. They had the power to put this man in office. And it appears, I guess it's still early, that those people that put him in office are going to be the most affected by some of the things he's done.
They are. Trump's approval is at 53%. It's the highest level he's ever achieved.
Right.
And MAGA world is celebrating as much as anybody in the Kremlin for all of his so-called accomplishments for this first month. But yet, they are the most economically susceptible to the damage that's being done by tariffs, by international conflicts, by conflicts with our neighbors, by tariff wars, by the fact that the inflation is rising, that interest rates are rising. Here's something people don't think about: car insurance. Car insurance is going to rise because of tariffs, because replacement parts for automobiles, 60% of them come from Mexico or Canada. That means that repairs are going to be more expensive. Car insurance that everybody pays is going to be more expensive. Absolutely nothing has been done to reduce inflation in the United States in the last month. In fact, most of these initiatives will ultimately increase inflation. That's what Mr. Market is betting on, because interest rates have been spiking, because businesses that benefit from lower interest rates have been sinking a little bit. People look at this and see what's coming, and it will not be pleasant.
Yeah, and it'll take a little while for it to sink in with most of these folks, I'm gathering, right?
It will take a little while to sink in. People will then notice it, but they will notice it with a vengeance when it happens. I mean, Joe Biden can testify to that.
Yeah. Okay. You promised me before we started this podcast today that you had some good things to report.
Well, I think it should not go without saying that there is a lot of waste and abuse in government. Some of it's now been identified and it's going to be eliminated, and that's all a good thing. But what I found even surprising, and I felt this, was the backlash to DEI, Black Lives Matter, the woke stuff, how deeply felt that was by the population. And Democrats have nobody to blame but themselves for advancing stuff that now most Democratic commentators will tell you we had no business doing. And getting rid of that stuff, I think, is going to be good for America. Getting rid of a lot of public spending is going to be helpful. We have a tax bill and a budget bill. We'll see where that ends up. The Senate and the House are a little bit divided. So there is some good things happening, but it's getting lost in the weeds because the throw everything against the wall and see what sticks approach to government is not a good approach. So the good that Trump is doing, well, his MAGA followers think that's all that's happening. They're not seeing the bad. It's going to ultimately come back to haunt Trump. He should have been a lot more surgical in a lot of the things that he was doing, and he would enjoy popularity for a lot longer.
And let's be clear, the woke stuff, whatever you think of it, one way or the other, is still only a very minor issue when you put it in a backdrop of all of the other things that are going on in our world with the economy and foreign policy and all of that. It's so minute, but it also is something that, like has happened throughout the history of politics, they take little things, both sides take little things and they blow them up to be big things and cause distraction to the other things that really are the big things.
They do. And I will say that the Trump administration has mastered that to a level not heretofore seen.
Right. Exactly. Okay. What else do we need to talk about before we wrap it up for a while?
It remains to be seen if Kash Patel will be confirmed. That's the last chance for the Senate to show any sort of role or integrity here. We're going to have tax bills. We have a March 14th deadline for a budget to be passed, a continuing resolution. A bill is working its way through the House. We'll see where it goes. The Senate's got a different path. We'll see where that goes. Trump is going to meet with Putin and hopefully Zelensky about Ukraine. We'll see what happens there and whether we completely capitulate to Putin. And we're just announced reciprocal tariffs. So I think we're getting ready for a trade war with the rest of the world that is probably unnecessary and damaging to the economy. So a lot going on.
So stay subscribed to Red versus Blue. We will be here on an ongoing basis when needed. We're going to take a few weeks off. You got some vacation. I got some. I'm going to have my hip replaced. I'm going to tell you right out front. So we will be back. We will continue this dialogue about what's going on as long as we can all stand it.
Keep the faith, everybody.
We will be back. Be sure and subscribe if you haven't already. Leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, and we will see you next time on another edition of Red versus Blue.
Stay safe.